This week you're reading the Four Views on Hell book, and just a overview about that. Denny Burke, the everlasting conscious torment view, seems to rely a lot on specific Bible passages. John Stackhouse, who's an annihilationist, he tends to rely a lot, I think, on God's nature. God would not be just or loving to have someone suffer forever and ever and ever, so they must burn up and go out of existence. Robin Perry, the universalist, seems to rely a lot on the big story of the Bible, the meta narrative, creation, fall, redemption. God makes all things are broken, all things must be restored, and that all things means all. So the whole story of the Bible pushes towards universalism. And then Jerry Walls, his view of purgatory, seems to rely on, I think, C.S. Lewis, which is a very evangelical thing to do, right? If you don't have a Bible verse for purgatory, well, what did C.S. Lewis say? So it seems like first chapter is a lot of Bible. Second chapter focuses a lot on God's nature. The third chapter, the big story. And the fourth one is, well, C.S. Lewis. So they're all interesting. I think for a lot of us growing up in conservative world, Denny Burke's chapter would be very straightforward. Yeah. I think ask how convincing his view is. How persuasive are the verses he marshals? So as you read his chapter, read like as if you were one of the others. And are these verses actually saying what he claims they're saying? Is it that cut and dried? I think for a lot of us, probably the one that's most interesting will be the Stackhouse chapter, because annihilationism is increasingly being accepted in the evangelical world. So that's the closest to the traditional view. And so look at his arguments and press on them, and how convincing are they? Robin Perry, still probably far afield for most of us, but increasingly getting a foothold. I remember maybe 20 years ago, I wrote a review of one of his books when he was using a pen name, George MacDonald, a fake name. And it was on universalism. And in my review, I said, we know that this author, whoever he is successful if in the future he starts using his own name. And 20 years later, he's using his own name. So his view has made some inroads. And then Jerry Walls, again, probably not too persuasive for us as Protestants, but see what you think about his Protestant view of purgatory. Is it possible that there is a need for sanctification, for growth after we're deceased? Do we need to grow in our holiness before we are ready to meet the Lord? So lots to talk about in class, but I don't want to get too much of your time now because you have a lot of reading to do. I want you to do that carefully. But I do want to say a few introductory things about hell, so that to kind of frame our discussion. First of all, so if you have your handout, we'll kind of follow some of the key points, at least on page 1. Page 2 is discussing the pros and cons for everlasting conscious suffering and annihilationism. The back and forth, we'll save page 2 for class. But page 1, just initially about hell, notice there are a few significant passages. Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats. Mark 9, avoid hell, Gehenna at all cost, right? Gouge out your right eye, cut off your right arm, do whatever it takes. Don't go to hell. Luke 16, the rich man and Lazarus. It's probably a parable, but a parable that tells a real story. Then, of course, Revelation chapter 20 with the final judgment in the lake of fire. Every New Testament author discussed hell, mentioned hell. Maybe not using the word, but they talked about judgment and fire. It's in every New Testament author, and nobody spoke more about hell than Jesus. That seems to matter, right? A lot of us, and I include myself here, we're kind of afraid to talk about hell because I don't want to sell fire insurance, right? I don't want to scare people into heaven. That seems beneath me. We think about the guy with the bullhorn on the street corner saying, turn or burn, judgment is coming. I don't want to be that guy, right? None of us do. So But I fear that we're so afraid of scaring people or manipulating them that we don't even talk about hell anymore. When's the last time you heard, even in a sermon, a discussion of hell? And that's a real thing. And what's more urgent than that? And I know, again, I don't want to scare people into believing in Jesus. But you know who did? Jesus. Jesus spent a lot of time scaring people. He said, cut off your arm, gouge out your eye, don't go to hell. So sometimes I wonder if we're too, pure is not the right word, but too afraid of being manipulated. And again, of course, manipulation is wrong and bad, and no one should do it. But it's okay if hell is real and people are heading there, and Jesus is correct that broad is the way that leads to hell. We should probably tell people. It's pretty important. The stakes, like we're playing for all the marbles. The stakes could not be higher in this life. There's a baseball term, we call it small ball, where you maybe get a single, try and steal second base, bunt the runner to third base, and then a sacrifice fly, you scratched out a run. People who don't have big home run hitters, they play small ball, just trying to get a run here and there. I think a lot of churches are content to play small ball. We talk about important things like how to be a better spouse, how to be a better worker, how to raise your children, how to handle anxiety. These are important things. I'm not minimizing them. But in light of forever and hell or the new earth, they're really much less significant. So we should keep doing that, of course, but we should remember, as Christian ministers of the gospel, we have big bats. We've got the only answer to sin, death, and hell. We should swing for the fences, right? We should try and hit a home run and tell people what it's all about and why it matters. Like, what are we doing? Let's not just play church. Let's act and talk as if the stakes are as high as Jesus says they are. Another comment about hell is I had a prof once who said, and he had unsaved family members, he said we should only ever talk about hell with tears. Hell should not be the punchline of any joke. And we shouldn't compare anything in this world to hell, right? A marriage is not hard as hell. A pain does not hurt as hell. A July afternoon is not hot as hell, right? We shouldn't compare anything to hell. It's just like some words are so horrific, we should never use them except for the real thing. Like, don't compare your bad week to the Holocaust, or don't compare your job to slavery, right? Whoa, slavery, Holocaust, these are humongous words, and it's offensive when you compare your situation to that. But we should feel the same way about hell, right? We minimize it, we cheapen it when we use that word for our own daily experience. Nothing you can ever experience in this life comes close to the horrors of hell. And let's be clear about that and be careful how we use it. I want to also say on their handout here, I call this the slippery slope of liberalism. And I came up with this in response to Rob Bell's book, Love Wins, in which he said that if you go to hell and don't like it, you can get out. And so the book was a functional universalism. It wasn't full-on academic universalism because someone could go to hell and stay there, but I doubt that anyone who read his book would say, yeah, if I go to hell, I might just choose to stay. You have to be a really tough old cuss to think that. I think most, if not all of his readers would say, well, yeah, if I don't like hell, I'll just get out. So functionally, practically, his book was universalist. And in response to his argument, I call this the slippery slope of liberalism, because this is what happened in the 19th century into the 20th century, and now we're seeing it played out again in the evangelical world. The slippery slope, it is a fallacy, because sometimes just because you take the first step doesn't mean you're going to go all the way to the bottom, but some slopes are slippery, and this one is especially. And here's how this thinking went in the 19th century, and here's how it's being replayed again in our world. So the first step is to question hell, right? If you are a theological progressive or a liberal and you're reading the Bible, what's the first thing that's going to offend you that you need to explain away? Well, in the late 1800s, it was hell. What kind of God would send people to hell forever? In fact, we were just coming out of slavery and still in Reconstruction and trying to figure out how to, and not doing a great job, but how do we incorporate former slaves now back into human society? And when we read the Bible, the liberals said, we can't imagine that God is like we just were. What God would do that? It's not just, it's not loving to send someone to hell forever and ever and ever. But here's the thing. You can't question the Bible's doctrine of hell. You can't say things like, God would not be loving. God would not be just to send people to hell forever. You can't say that without reassessing what sin is, right? Buried in that statement, God would not be loving or just to send someone to hell. It assumes our sin isn't all that bad. Our sin doesn't deserve hell. So we ask the question, and even in Stackhouse's chapter, like, what could a finite person ever do to deserve infinite punishment? Well, Denny Burke's response is, the consequence of your sin, it depends on the status of your victim, right? So if you swat a fly, nobody cares. If you start pulling legs off of frogs just for kicks, we get a bit nervous about you. If you drown a sack full of puppies, now we're going to call the police. Cats, not a problem, but puppies, you're in trouble. If you kill a human, you're going to jail. You might get the electric chair. And what does someone deserve who kills the infinite Son of God? And remember that song we sing, I heard my voice among the mockers, crucify him, crucify him. Make no mistake, apart from the restraining Holy Spirit and the grace of God, you and I would have killed Jesus. We participate. In fact, when we sin, we are ratifying that. We want to play God. Well, what would a person deserve who kills God? Yes, we are finite, but our victim is infinite. And so we would deserve infinite suffering. So here's how it starts. We are offended by what the Bible says about hell. That leads us to minimize sin. We don't deserve hell. And that leads us to minimize the cross. Because if we don't deserve hell, tell me, what was Jesus doing on the cross? Why did he have to die? Well, the theological progressives, all they could say is, Jesus is dying. He's stretching out his arms to show us, I love you this much. But think about it. If the cross is only an act of love, if that's all it's doing, it's not even that. Because love is only love if it accomplishes something. Right? So, guys, if you're walking through downtown Grand Rapids with your sweetheart, and you're walking by the river, and you're overcome by the emotion of love, maybe it's springtime, and the flowers are popping, and the hormones are going, and you think, honey, I love you. I love you this much. Let me show you. And you jump into the Grand River, and you drown. That's not love. That's just dumb. But if she slips in and she's drowning and you jump in and save her and you die in the process, you'll make the papers. What an act of love. You gave your life. Of course you love her. You see, love is only love if it does something. If the cross is just saying I love you, well, that's stupid. Why didn't God just bring out a megaphone and say, attention, people of earth, I love you. I really, really do. Trust me. Look, chocolates, puppies, pizza, for everyone. Like, he could have showed us his love, but if the cross is just showing I love you, if that's all it is, it's not even love. It's just dumb. And think about the cross. And the Apostle Paul, this is what woke him up. in his legalism and Phariseeism. The cross unmasks our goodness. The cross is what reveals how sinful we are. Think about this. If desperate situations call for extreme measures, then an extreme measure is a sign you might be in a desperate situation. If I'm driving down the highway and a police car flashes its lights behind me, my wife will turn to me in her disapproving voice and say, "What did you do?" If a convoy of police cars is encircling us and a TV helicopter is overhead shining its searchlight right upon us, Julie gets a bit more accusatory. "What did you do?" If a fighter jet joins the chase, dropping bombs, ripping up the pavement, coming towards our car, she's going to scream like a lady in an action movie. "What did you do?" Okay, think about what God did to save us. God did not hand us a brochure as if we were just uninformed. He did not stage an intervention as if we were just a little bit stubborn. God answered our need with the cross. If the death of the Son of God was required for us to be saved, what did we do? This is really hard to admit. It's hard to think about. I hate it. But it's got to be true. If Jesus' death was necessary, and we know it was because Jesus asked, "Father, if there's any other way, let's try that." And what was his answer? Deafening silence. No, it's got to be this way. That means you and I deserve hell. There's no way around it. So the slippery slope goes, God would not be just or loving to make us suffer forever and ever, but you can't say that without minimizing sin. And once you've minimized sin, you're minimizing the cross and what God did to save us, and you can't do that without minimizing Jesus and who he is. And so the next thing to go is the deity of Christ. Because if Jesus is not bearing my penalty in my place, then does he even have to be God? Well, no. So the theological liberals in the 19th and early 20th century, they said, well, he's not. Jesus is just a good person who is the moral Son of God, but he's not metaphysically God. He's just a really good human. And the next thing to go is even the whole idea of God. The most popular view of God among the progressives, and even today in universities, is panentheism. And this idea says God is not even a distinct being. He's not a separate being from us. He's just a name for the whole shebang. He's the one. He's the whole. He's the infinite. He's the force that's in everything. And so is God even God anymore? So here's the point. The Bible's not a smorgasbord. It's not a buffet. You can't walk up to the Bible and say, "Give me an extra helping of love, but hold the wrath. Give me some of that grace, but the justice, just a little bit for me." The Bible's not a buffet you get to pick and choose which parts you like. The Bible is a sweater. If you pull one thread and yank hard enough, the whole thing unravels. And so the doctrine of hell, historically, in the 19th and 20th century, this is the wedge which unraveled the Christian faith for the theological liberals. And we should just know that and be aware as it starts to happen today in our circles, that when you question the doctrine of hell, as the Bible presents it, it's really hard to do that without minimizing sin. And once you've minimized sin, you've just minimized the cross, and very soon, why does Jesus even have to be God? Maybe he's not. And then, is God even God? So one thing to ask, and I want to be fair about this, but we'll discuss it in class. What I just said, this slippery slope of liberalism, would it fit what John Stackhouse is doing in annihilationism? Or is there a way to be an annihilationist and avoid this slippery slope? So that's just one question to think about, and we will discuss it in class. I'll stop there and do one other quick video lecture, and then we'll see you in class and discuss the book. Thanks.